Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to the show today. It is Wednesday, May 28th, 2014. June is almost upon us, and there's still ice in Lake Superior. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, ready to handle your calls when they come on in. Tomorrow, Thursday, James Fetzer will be our on-air guest to talk about the book written by Jim Norvell about how Lee Harvey Oswald helped the FBI foil an assassination plot against John F. Kennedy in Chicago, which says that maybe he was an undercover informant working for the intelligence agencies, and the assassination plotters realized it and set him up to be the patsy in Dealey Plaza, Dallas. Now, Monday, June 2nd, David Merland is going to be our guest to talk about what he has uncovered through careful study of the United States tax code. And you've probably heard some of his ads running on our program here about how, basically, the IRS isn't even following their own rules in terms of determining your tax obligation. So we're going to be talking with that. Norman Finkelstein is going to be our guest in June. We still haven't nailed a date down on that. Dr. Gilbert Levin will be our guest Friday, June 13th. Now, for those of you living in the Salt Lake City area, tomorrow morning I'm going to be the on-air guest on K-Talk. That's KTKK, Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a huge station. They cover a good part of the state there. During their drive time morning show, it's at 8 o'clock Mountain Time, which is 4 o'clock in the morning here in Oahu. But if you want to tune in, that will be a lot of fun. Not exactly sure what we're going to be talking about, but it's always interesting to be on their station. Now then, voting in the Syrian presidential elections has already started in outlying areas. In particular in Lebanon, where there is a huge population of Syrian refugees who've been made refugees by 3 years of this attempted covert U.S. overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, and they flocked to the polls. It was such a crowd they had to basically get the authorities out there to say, look, you got to line up this way and you got to put the line down this road. And it was just huge. And already we're seeing from this election, Bashar al-Assad is a landslide winner for a new term. We're already seeing the media spin out there saying that these Syrians really didn't want to vote for Bashar al-Assad, but they're terrified of him if they don't vote for him, that he will get them and they'll never be able to go home. That, of course, is complete and utter nonsense, because the Syrian elections, like the U.S. elections, you don't put your name on those ballots. And you get to mark the ballots inside a little curtain and then throw them in the box. Nobody knows who voted for who. So this is a desperate, pathetic attempt by the U.S. to ahead of time discredit Assad's coming election victory, because when he wins, it completely undermines the entire U.S. justification for having covertly supported these hired mercenaries in Syria for the last 3 years. Oh, we're saving the poor Syrian people from an evil tyrant and a dictator who is cruel to them. And, of course, we have to go in and make them all homeless and destroy their cities. And, of course, we know that's not the real reason. And we can hear the panic beginning to grow in Washington, D.C. Story coming out of FitzNews.com. Obama to escalate the Syrian conflict. He's sending in the advisors. And they had this interesting little quote about Vietnam. Remember how Vietnam started? We weren't born back then. Well, yeah, I was. I'm an old guy. I admit it. And yes, Vietnam started with advisors that the U.S. poured into South Vietnam and said they're not there to fight, but of course if somebody shoots at them, they're going to shoot back, and that's how we got mired in Vietnam. Now, there's an interesting observation. This is coming out of Francis Boyle, who's a law professor, writes a lot for media around the world. And he's reporting basically that the World Court has ruled in a case Nicaragua brought against the United States over covert U.S. assistance to subversive and terrorist armed activity within their borders. And the court ruled in favor of Nicaragua that under international law, it is illegal for the United States to covertly support and arm militant activity in other countries to overthrow their government. So not that it's a big shock to anybody listening to this show, but the World Court is saying that all of these 60 attempts by the United States of America to overthrow other governments and replace them with governments friendly to the U.S. are, in fact, violations of international law. And that includes Syria. Now, down in Libya, and we're getting this story out of Middle East Online, gunmen attacked the Interior Ministry unit tasked with protecting Libya's outgoing government, which may be outgoing in a slightly different context than they're reporting here. But basically it tells us a couple of things. First of all, another U.S.-backed regime change plunges a hapless nation into total chaos. What's really going on in Libya is the Libyan people are taking back their country from this U.S.-approved puppet government that was installed after they killed Gaddafi and shut down the Golden Hour. That's what's going on. Now, the State Department has issued an advisory to U.S. citizens to leave Libya immediately, which, if I recall, Vietnam, just before the fall of Saigon, the U.S. State Department told Americans, better get out of Vietnam, we're losing that one. And this is a crossroads right now, because this is going to be a major setback in the war for Bretton Woods and the petrodollar. A U.S. defeat in Libya is going to further erode U.S. support for more military adventures. And right now, the United States cannot sell the American people on the need to invade Libya again all over so soon after the last conquest. Now, if the U.S. is forced out of Libya and Assad does win re-election in Syria, which the early polls in Lebanon seem to indicate, the U.S. war agenda is in serious, serious trouble. Absent another false flag event to rebuild popular support, this war agenda is crumbling. And even a new false flag is not likely to succeed in this day and age when the average life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer. Now, the United States has deployed the USS Bataan. This is an assault ship with about 1,000 Marines off the coast of Libya, ostensibly in case the U.S. Embassy has to be evacuated. Well, you don't need an assault ship with 1,000 Marines to evacuate the U.S. Embassy. Now, if you're not familiar with the term, an assault ship is sort of a baby carrier. It's about the size of the World War II carriers. And it has a flight deck for vertical takeoff and landing aircraft and helicopters, and down below it's got a gigantic hold filled with hovercraft and other marine craft that are preloaded with tanks and jeeps and Hummers and guns, and basically an assault ship, as the name implies. It's there to start a war, to go into other people's countries and cause mayhem. So it looks like the U.S. is positioning assets to go into Libya if it looks like their puppet regime is going to be given the old heave-ho. And, of course, in the Mediterranean, it's only 3 days for that ship to sail over and be off the coast of Syria. Now, Libya's Ansar al-Sharia militant leader in Benghazi is warning the U.S. not to interfere with what's going on in Libya, or they're going to turn it all into a new Somalia, Iraq, or Afghanistan, a recognition that all of those were these horrible mires that the U.S. is still stuck in. And that's why Obama is out there saying, well, we have to keep trainers in Afghanistan at least till 2016. They haven't been able to completely bring the entire country under the control of the U.S. puppet government in Kabul. They can't. Now, Charles Krauthammer is out there castigating Obama for his announcement of keeping troops in Afghanistan longer than he promised, saying it's a sign of personal narcissism. Obama can't admit he's wrong or failing, no matter how many lives of other people's children it's going to cost. We have to take a break for commercials. I know we got a caller waiting on the line I've kept for a little bit. We're going to take your call as soon as we come back from these commercials.
Dreams becoming...
excuse me, that was a mistake on my part with the mixer here. All right, we've got a caller on the line, Ron in Arkansas. Ron, thank you for waiting so much through the first segment. And what's on your mind today?
Well, Mike, my main area of interest over the last couple of years, of course, I've been awake for about 14 years, but last couple of years I've been discovering this 14th Amendment and all the travesties that occurred between the 13th and the 17th Amendments. Mm-hmm. I believe those things could be fixed. Most of our problems might go away, but I wanted to ask you for an email address to get a hold of John. The reason that I just stopped in the house for a second, and I've always got you guys on, or I've only been listening briefly, but last 4 or 5 months. But anyway, the last caller in Ben's program was a guy named Gary from Arkansas, and he was in the same discovery mode of research that I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I want to do is I wanted to say this on the air in case he's still listening. I would very much like the opportunity, someone to help facilitate us to get together and network and resource together. And so I'm going to write to John, and I'm going to, in that letter, I will explain this. And if Gary's still listening, if there's a way that he could write to John and you guys could somehow facilitate a connection between us where we could network and resource together, though that's what it's going to take.
Okay, Ron, I'm going to cut you off here right now. First of all, John Stadmiller is an extraordinarily busy individual. He's not only one of the on-air hosts at Republic Broadcasting, but he basically runs the network and the company. So I'll tell you what, let me come up with an alternative plan. If you want to send me an email, and if this other gentleman is listening to the show and he wants to send me an email, I will hook you together to make sure that it happens, okay?
That is wonderful. That's all I ask. And thank you for what you do.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Frank in Michigan. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Do you think there's a possibility that this government we installed in Afghanistan, what is it, Karzai, might just ask us to get out?
They very much could. Remember, Hamid Karzai has refused to sign an agreement with the United States of America to keep U.S. forces on the ground. Obama does not actually have a legal foundation for saying U.S. troops will stay in Afghanistan past the end of 2014, which is the end of the current agreement. And the new incoming government is probably not going to sign that. But we're starting to see this attitude coming out of the U.S. government that they have a right to send their soldiers anywhere they want, whether the local government wants it or not. We heard John McCain the other day saying that the U.S. ought to invade Nigeria to find those poor, suffering, kidnapped girls, even if the government of Nigeria says, please stay out. And
I know it's ridiculous. It really is ridiculous.
Yeah, basically, Obama has simply declared that we're gonna stay garrisoned, in the Afghanistan province. Got to make sure that oil is sold only for U.S. dollars. Got to keep up that flow of opium into the United States.
Right, the drugs are very important. We got to keep the CIA full of drugs.
Yeah, and it's gotten so bad. I mean, there was a story on Fox News earlier about how the New York Police Department is now carrying kits to deal with heroin overdose because this new heroin coming in from Afghanistan is cheap and it's very potent, and people are accidentally taking too much. And all of this is a direct result of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, because before the U.S. went into Afghanistan, the Taliban had just about eradicated opium poppy production. And the U.S. invades, and the poppies are blooming, and I posted a whole bunch of photos to the front of whatreallyhappened.com today showing these opium poppy fields being guarded and protected by U.S. troops.
Well, you're right. The end is coming near. If we lose these countries, and even Egypt, that could turn around too, couldn't it?
Yeah, we're seeing all of these other nations around the world. They're sick and tired of the dollar. They're sick and tired of the U.S. growing rich on this mafia-like piece of the action of all their commerce. The bottom line here is the policy is failing. This war for Bretton Woods and the petrodollar is already failing. Our government will never admit defeat until they're absolutely back up against the wall with the rifles pointed at them by the Russians, by the Chinese, by the Iranians.
The economy crashes,
and then it'll be the American people chasing after them with pitchforks and torches and tar and feathers.
I think it's looking better than it has in a long time.
Yeah, it does feel like it really is close to collapse. And again, if Libya kicks out their U.S. puppet regime, and Syria's Assad wins the election, the last thing Washington, D.C. can do right now is stand up and say, yeah, we've been lying to you all along about all of these wars. The real agenda is to prop up Wall Street, and we just need your children to go and fight those wars. The American people aren't going to go along with that.
Right. Okay, Mike, I'll let you go. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch to Dan in Washington. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good morning, Mike. I'm skipping a little ahead, and I apologize. I don't know if I can call later, but I'm calling about the Santa Barbara shooting, and this Mr. Martinez, the father of the victim, that's going around now pushing it's the darn NRA, and it's the politicians and all this. I just want to know if somebody can point me to the video where he's railing against the NSA and the police department, because the narrative, as I understand it, is 3 weeks prior, his parents went to the police to complain specifically because of these YouTube videos, yet nobody thought to start watching these YouTube videos, and they say spying on all of us and all of this, but where's the videos of him demanding accountability for the police department and the NSA? He's got the NRA down, yeah, we all know that, but as maybe an effective rebuttal to all of this garbage, someone can start asking.
This is obviously another crafted situation like Sandy Hook to push the gun grabber agenda. We've already got all these witnesses who saw a second person in the car with him doing the actual shooting. And probably the police and the NSA were reading this guy's online comments and said, boy, he'd make a really great patsy for another gun grabber hoax. You know, and at this point,
it's just a good rebuttal to all the people. It's the NRA and that. So just switch the narrative. Well, what about the NSA? I don't think anybody's of terrorism.
I don't even think anybody's listening to this guy rail about the NRA, because we've seen these guys
in the chat rooms I'm seeing.
Well, remember
they're paid or not, we all know they're paid on there.
Yeah, that's right. The chat rooms are being flooded by all these fake identities from this very expensive software the U.S. government bought to manufacture hundreds and hundreds of fake identities and flood the chat rooms. It's all a gigantic hoax. You are the Matrix. The Matrix has you. Okay. All right, Dan, we're going to switch over. We're running out of time. Nathan in California. Aloha, Nathan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. Sounds like you're pretty busy today, so I'll try to capsulize everything for you. I want to talk very briefly about Libya, but one thing I wanted to mention was to commend you on one of your reports a couple of months ago. You said Assad had a 70% approval rating in Syria.
Yes.
Remember that?
I remember that.
Okay. Well, about 2.5 years ago, I listened to a podcast on YouTube, and it was these two young men that were talking, and one of them just got back from Syria. This is as the Arab Spring had started. And he said, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but Assad has a 70% approval rating. So we were lied to from the very, very beginning. And he also mentioned that Assad does a very good job over there. He rides herd over 23 different religions, and overall people were, pretty happy with him. And he said, you know, this relationship between Syria and Iran, people think it's this, something that's new. He said that is not true. He said Syria and Iran have been trading partners for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it goes primarily back into the world of agriculture. So the media...
Yeah, the media is trying to sell us the new war, and they're putting pedal to the metal, because if they lose both Libya and Syria, the war agenda is over and done with. And so that's why they're getting ready to invade. They're going to gin up some kind of an excuse to invade. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, George in Texas, I'm going to take your phone call first. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go to the phones here, somebody just sent me this amazing picture from Lebanon showing the crowd of Syrian refugees headed to the polls to vote in the Syrian elections. Oh, boy. I'll bet you the White House Situation Room is looking at that picture and saying, oh, boy, are we in trouble? We got to find some way to discredit that election. You know, this is the same government that insists a junta in Kiev voting itself back into power is legitimate democracy. But the results of the Syrian election, we can ignore those. We don't recognize the result of those elections. They're getting really obvious about the double standards and hypocrisy, which is a good thing because it's calling attention to itself. Okay, back to the phones. George in Texas. George, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, how you doing? I could say one thing, that 3-week attention span that the elites count on to sort of like get away with it.
Yeah.
Well, Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst was defeated, and he will no longer be the returning lieutenant governor because 3 years ago, He was one of the people behind killing the anti-TSA groping bill. And the Texans never forgot about that. And they made sure that they never forgot about it. And he's no longer lieutenant governor.
Well, you know, the Internet and the independent media has given our society a far longer memory span than the corporate media and the government would like to have. I mean, they've survived all these years by throwing distractions at us. You know, Beirut bombing, that makes us look bad. The next day we invade Grenada, change the focus, take people's mind off of it. But they can't do that anymore. And that, of course, is a major concern for all these politicians going into the November election. Is they can throw gay rights and abortion and women's feminism and the rest of it at us as hard as they want. We are deciding for ourselves what the real issues of the election are going to be, and it's the wars and the economy. Okay? I guess we lost George here, so let's switch to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, the White House screwing up and outing a CIA operative in Afghanistan, I just can't help believe that there's something else there going on. It's not a blunder. It's something else in the works. What do you make out of that?
Well, it could easily be a blunder, or it could be a repeat of the Valerie Plame situation where the agent was outed as part of an effort to discredit whatever they were working on.
Yeah. Had he come out against something, against the administration in some way, or not?
It could very well have been that they decided this particular CIA agent had developed a moral conscience, which is a fatal disease working for the United States government. And all we can really say for certain is we don't know. But certainly the White House is allowing this to be given a lot of media coverage because at least it's taking everybody's minds off the IRS targeting of dissidents. It's taking everyone's mind off the NSA spy scandal, and they're really worried about that because Glenn Greenwald is getting ready to release a list of 2 million names of American citizens being spied on actively by the National Security Agency. And I'm going to tell you right now, if my name is not on that list, I'm going to be so disappointed. I'm going to have to cry and do a whole bottle of scotch. Okay?
So we may be looking at a new title for Barack Obama, maybe Barack Blunder.
That's a good one. I like that.
Barack Blunder.
Yeah, Barack Blunder. And now the Irish are going to be mad at us.
Thanks, Michael.
All righty. Yes, Obama was not born in Kenya. He was born in County Cork, Ireland, don't you know? He's a good Belfast boy. All righty, moving on along here. What's really very interesting looking at the situation, and this gets right to the heart of what I've been saying all along about how the U.S. government's propaganda has lost a sense of narrative. For propaganda to work, it has to present a cohesive whole that people can trust and believe in. When it's scattered all over the place, then everyone says, we can't believe any of this stuff. And it's kind of interesting because Petro Poroshenko, who is the newly installed president of the junta in Kiev, is out there saying that his electoral victory, which we know is just rampant with fraud, showed that Ukrainians have chosen the path of European Union integration. And what really makes this kind of laughable is that the elections across the European Union show that the Europeans don't want to be integrated with the European Union anymore. So they're basically just making this stuff up to try and sound good for the next news bite, and they really have lost any kind of a sense of continuity for the presentation of the propaganda illusion. We're all starting to see the cracks in the matrix that surrounds us here. Story coming out of Ex-Republic TV, the civil war is metastasizing in the Ukraine and the United States remaining silent on the civilian casualties. And there are. Poroshenko's first order as the newly selected president of Kiev is to basically declare open total war on the independence movement in the East. And they are killing civilians. They almost shelled a teacher's college the other day. They've shelled a hospital today. It's just, scorched earth policy. Meanwhile, of course, on the other side, militia groups are flocking to Donetsk to stand up. This is going to break into an outright open war, which, of course, is going to make the bankers happy. but not everybody who has to go into it. Remember, yesterday, Poroshenko was demanding and will probably get direct U.S. military assistance to put down the separatists in the east. So we're already out there, yet another war to enslave people to the private central banks. Ukrainian government vows more military action against the separatists. You will be our slave or you will die. Kind of reminds me back of Patrick Henry's famous speech, which ended with, "Give me liberty or give me death." And there was a little bit more there than just bravado. What he was telling the British government was, you can kill me or you can let me go, but under no circumstances will I be your slave. So you might as well quit and save the lives of your own soldiers. And, of course, the British government, just as intractable as the U.S. government, did pour their British soldiers in there, trying to enslave the American colonies back to the Bank of England, and they wound up losing. And then they tried again in 1812, lost again. All righty. Now, as for Petro Poroshenko himself, he's being promoted in the Western media as this billionaire who got rich on chocolate. How can you not like a guy who, makes fine Ukrainian chocolates? But his real story is a little more interesting than that. And this is a story out of strategicculture.org, and I linked it to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Basically, Poroshenko made his money laundering money of Soviet times corrupt administrators. He's never actually started a business of his own. It's all invented. He made a lot of money in criminal endeavor. His father was into organized crime, got sent to prison in 1986, and the business was dirty, plundering state property by armed gangs. The Poroshenko family has been linked with illegal arms, prostitution, and drugs, just like the American CIA. And so, of course, he's the perfect president for the U.S. interests inside Kiev. Upping the ante, Gazprom has once again warned Kiev that if they do not pay the $3.5 billion gas debt, that the valves will be shut on June the 3rd. So I'm almost expecting any moment the U.S. government to take $3.5 billion from you, the American taxpayer, to give to Poroshenko, to give to Gazprom, to keep the gas flowing. You're going to have to make do with less so that the corrupt can have that much more. Now, an interesting story, this came out of Wake Up From Your Slumber. Over in the U.S. Congress, they're all fretting that because of the tensions in Ukraine, Russia may quit the START nuclear arms treaty. And so the U.S. Congress has decided it is time for them to take measures. In other words, what they're saying is they're going to withdraw from the START nuclear treaty because they think Russia might do it, and they want to do it first, but it's all Russia's fault. They made us do it, mommy. So they're basically getting rid of all of these nuclear safeguard treaties. This thing is going to wind up in a nuclear war. Now, the OSCE says it's lost contact with a second one of their teams near Donetsk. Now, the first team was captured, then released on accusations of spying for the West. And apparently they sent in a second team. They've lost contact with that. Now, interestingly enough, over in Abkhazia, there is a sudden rise of militants, an armed rebellion. Armed men stormed Abkhazian presidential building last night. This is most likely another U.S.-sponsored coup to get back at Russia for losing Crimea. It's the same game over and over again. They don't understand. We see it. We'll be back. We've got a caller waiting on the line after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go with Tony in Tennessee. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, Michael. I tuned in yesterday in the middle of a conversation you were having, a discussion on gold and silver and the fix coming off of silver this summer. And I'd heard this about a month ago, but I never really got any details on this. Now, can you give me some more details on this?
Yeah, basically the story is that the London Daily Silver Fix has been so scandalized by rigging that they basically announced they're going to stop doing it and allow the market forces to determine the price of silver. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to come up with some other kind of way to keep physical metal prices down, because the entire paper-based economy is so fragile. The last thing they can allow to happen is for people to close their negative interest savings account and dump their poorly performing stock portfolios and start buying physical silver and gold, because it's going to take liquidity out of these paper markets. It's going to basically preserve the wealth of the people in a way where the banksters can't really get at it. And more, it's going to make it much more difficult for these bullion banks to try and buy and replace all the other people's gold that they've been playing fast and loose with.
Yeah, I can't see them really lifting they're doing such a good job of controlling this market. I can't really see them lifting it, because if the fix comes off of gold and silver, the sky's the limit.
Well, they're taking the fix off of silver, not of gold. They're talking about doing that, but again, I'm absolutely in agreement with you. They're going to try and find some other clandestine way to try and control and manipulate the price. But we're seeing more and more of these metals traders being sent to jail for deliberately manipulating the price to their own purposes. And it's a growing tide. And I think that episode off of America's Book of Secrets, The Gold Conspiracy, woke a lot of people up, because I got a lot of email about that one. And people are beginning to realize the entire banking financial system is not about taking care of the commerce of the nation or the people or the general good. It's all about pillaging ordinary people to make themselves insanely wealthy.
Do you think, Michael, that they are out to destroy the miners?
I think quite the contrary. Right now, they're desperate for mines to be operating at full capacity. But we do know over the last several years, the physical gold being put into the market has exceeded the global mining output for that metal. So it had to be coming from someplace, and now it's becoming very obvious that the New York Federal Reserve was taking Germany's gold and other people's gold and saying, yes, we'll store it for you, and then they take it out the back door.
Yeah. Well, it sure would be nice to see the controls come off.
It certainly would be. Well, I mean, all controls coming off. That's what freedom is all about. Is, for us to be free of government control, for the economy to be free of government control, for gold and silver to be free of government and bankster control. That's what we really need to see happen, because all of these controlling systems are controlling everything for their benefit, not ours. Now, we're seeing, again, Austria is now demanding an audit of their gold bullion at the Bank of London. What really needs to happen is for every single nation that has gold on deposit at the New York Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Bank of France, to all demand an audit at the exact same time. So they can't just move the bullion from vault to vault and pretend that it belongs to different people. Little sort of a shell game going on there.
Well, I sure hope they lose control. Thanks for your time, Michael. I appreciate your show.
All right, well, thank you very much. And they are losing control. They're losing control of the minds of America and the minds of the world. That's why they're screaming about trying to find some way to shut down the independent media. That's why you had Senator Chuck Schumer out there the other day saying, well, the First Amendment should only apply to the corporate media, and the government should have the right to curtail and limit what anybody else is saying. That's the most un-American thing I've ever heard come out of the mouth of anybody in the United States Congress. And they're trying to push that idea that the Bill of Rights is conditional on permission from the government, and it is not. And it is a measure of just how afraid they are that they have lost the trust of the American people. We don't believe what they say anymore. We're starting to think for ourselves and realize what an absolutely raw deal we have all gotten from this private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest and their pet-owned politicians as well. Alrighty, moving on right along. Very interesting kind of a story over at Washington Times. Obama extends Afghan war, eyes Syria, and they quote him as saying, it's harder to end wars than to begin them. No, it isn't. All you have to do is say, I quit. We're done. The reason these wars are dragging on in Iraq and Afghanistan and now Libya and Syria is because the U.S. is failing to achieve their objective of complete control over the nation and its resources. The U.S. is in control of the capital cities, but not the outlying areas. And that's why this thing is stuttering to a halt. And they don't want to admit that they haven't won. They've already declared victory. But if they've declared victory, if they've really won the war and accomplished their aims, why are they keeping people in these countries? It's a garrison. The legionnaires of Rome must garrison the empire to keep them all in line. That's the model that's being played here. And again, everybody's still reacting to Obama's now saying that our kids are going to be on the ground in Afghanistan until 2016. Remember when he was campaigning back in 2008? And he was absolutely out there saying that he was going to end the wars and bring our kids home as soon as he became president.
I promise you this, that if we have not gotten our troops out by the time I am president, it is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
And then, of course, in the State of the Union address, he promised our kids to be out of Afghanistan at the end of 2014. Now it's 2016. Why should anybody listen to this guy any longer? Everything coming out of his mouth is an absolute lie. He's basically trying to say whatever it is he thinks is going to get you to go along with his agenda. And none of it is true. How much do you have to be lied to by the government before you finally acknowledge you live under a government that lies to you about everything, constantly, as a means of controlling you? Because that's all that mind control is. There are no weird rays or pills or drugs in the water. All mind control is controlling the mind by controlling what the mind knows, or more importantly, what the mind believes. They rely on your beliefs to keep you in chains, enslaved to their point of view and their agenda. And we're all breaking free. We're all becoming heretics. We refuse to believe as we're told to believe. And that's why they're so scared. Because propaganda and lies and fraud and deception and maintaining the American people's belief in the rightness of the government is all they have to stay in power. And they're losing it every single day. So Obama's going to keep our kids in Afghanistan at least through 2016 here. Got to protect that flow of opium to the United States. Got to make sure that Afghanistan oil is only sold for U.S. dollars. Those are the real agendas here. Taliban is obviously complaining about the U.S. announcement. And apparently the stress is getting to Obama because you've probably noticed the last few days he's doing a lot of personal appearances. He's out there at the commencement of the West Point. He did Arlington on Memorial Day. Now he was out today at a student science fair. And a reporter came up and asked him about the U.S. sending trainers into Syria. And apparently Obama turned on him and snapped and said, look, this is about the science fair. Now, it's a very alarming sign when the president starts to lose his cool in public. Very alarming sign indeed. Article over at wakeupfromyourslumber.com that baiting the dragons, the bears, and the lions is a very, very dangerous game for Washington, D.C., and they're absolutely right. The end of all of these policies is an all-out world war, and it will go nuclear. And the bankers are willing to risk that to keep the world enslaved to their ink and paper. We have to take a break for our top of the hour break. I know we got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to have to put you off until after we come back from the top of the hour segment. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for some reason, Fox News seems to be obsessing about this former Marine who supposedly drove across the Mexican border with some guns in his car that he is saying he didn't even know were there. And he's been arrested and he's being taken to court. And they're making a really, really big deal about this. Maybe it's just part of that whole connoidization process so they don't have to talk about the IRS and the NSA and everything else that's going on. But it almost looks like they're trying to provoke some kind of a diplomatic crisis now with the government of Mexico. I mean, let's just take on the entire world here. All right, we're going to go to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I had a couple comments, but remember when Obama says, take that to the bank? He didn't finish it. He's pretty much he's taken us all to the bankers.
Yeah, he absolutely has. But he didn't do it alone. I mean, George Bush was doing the same thing, and Clinton was doing the same thing, and the elder Bush was doing the same thing for the last 100 years.
Yep. Hey, did you see an article a video on YouTube with Warren Pollack about consumerism? How it's like a religion. You know how people stand in line for hours waiting for the little gadgets. What's going to happen when prices get so high, people can't afford them? There's going to be like a withdrawal panic going on. It's going to be pretty scary out there.
I don't think there's going to be a withdrawal. I mean, it's already going on here. People are not buying the latest and greatest gadgets. We're seeing retail outlets closing all across the country for lack of business. The Baltic Dry Index is way, way down, which indicates manufacturers are not getting orders for the new gizmos and gadgets that are coming out here. People are just hanging on to what they've got for as long as they can. And this whole consumerism was being deliberately driven by the financial sector of the country through things like planned obsolescence, marketing of devices and appliances as fashion accessories. Oh, you've got last year's tablet. You're socially inferior, and that kind of stuff. And those tactics aren't going to survive and hold up during hard economic times. In fact, I'm going to tell you, if you're involved in manufacturing here, what is going to allow you to survive the hard economic times is putting out a quality product that people will buy knowing it will last. It's easy to repair, it's durable, it's not going to fail on them 3 weeks out of the warranty. Toshiba. And that's the direction manufacturing and the economy has to go. People are tired of these cars that come with all these electronic gizmos and gadgets. They want simple, basic, easy-to-repair transportation that is going to last 10 years. But our entire economy was enriched. The money junkies grew rich selling us junk that was deliberately designed to fall apart as soon as you were finished making the payments to the loan company.
Hey, did you see the Cadillac released the ELR? They got a stockpile of 725. That's like the Cadillac version of the Volt. I looked at the price. It was $75,000 base price. That thing's never going to sell in this kind of economy.
No, it absolutely isn't. And the problem with, the hybrids seem to be doing very, very well. But the all-electric cars, the infrastructure to keep them powered still isn't there. I've seen one Volt in person here on the island of Oahu, and the only charging station I've seen outside of a home, they have one set up down here at the Pearl Ridge Mall, right in front of the Longs on the lower level. But I've never seen anybody actually using it.
And one more thing I wanted to talk about, tell everybody about. The next war, this next war is going to be a missile war. You got eras where you got like wars on the sea, and Russia's land is impenetrable. They got the S-400 and the S-500 coming out. They have the Iskander and the Smerch missile system. This next war will lose because it's all a missile war. You can build so many missiles for a price of one of our planes, and it's just we're all walking into a wall of pain. Plus, they got the anti-ship Yakhmat P-800 anti-ship missiles. Why do you think during the Syrian war they stayed way offshore or fleet? Because Assad has those. I don't know if he has the S-400, but he has the S-300.
Well, the issue is
S-400 now.
The issue is a little more complicated than that because the U.S. Military procurement system isn't about procuring good weapons. It's about finding ways to spend money and just, add on all kinds of gadgets and gizmos. It seems to be permeating our entire culture that the more, trinkets you have on something, the better it has to be. But Russia and China are spending far less money on their military than the U.S., but they're spending it very wisely with the objective of coming up with effective weapon systems. All their latest nuclear warheads, China's new third stage, are maneuverable devices which completely obviate the U.S. ballistic missile defense system, which was built around the doctrine of a predictable incoming parabolic arc of the target. And that's now completely non-operational. These new Russian ship-killing missiles are designed to evade the Phalanx close-in weapons system. And, plus the fact that the United States stockpiles are drawn down. The U.S. doesn't have the manpower, even with all the illegal aliens they're hoping are going to put on the uniform. We don't have the manufacturing to sustain the creation of war material. Nobody wants to loan us any more money to finance a war except the Federal Reserve, and nobody's going to take their paper and ink for very much longer. Yeah, if this war really gets going, the U.S. is going to lose it. They're already losing it. They just don't want to admit it.
Well, Russia's also given the Chinese the S-400 because they were a little wary. But since they got the S-500 coming out, they're getting the S-400, and I don't know how many they're getting. But can you imagine if Russia has them manufacture all their? Russia has China manufacture all their missiles. They can pump out. Look at they can pump out so many missiles while we're still working on the F-35 till 2018.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when we got into World War I and World War II, the United States had a very powerful manufacturing base that could be quickly adapted and changed over to producing war munitions. You had companies that their normal business was washing machines, and all of a sudden they were out there making artillery shells, and the switchover was very easy to accomplish. But right now, if you go out across the American heartland and you look at all those factory buildings, they're rusted, empty hulks. We don't have the manufacturing capacity to sustain a conventional war, which is why it will wind up going nuclear.
We'll lose that, too, because they have 10,000 missiles in reserve that they can actually pull out. We don't have that many in reserve, maybe like 1,200. They have 10,000.
And there's another aspect, and that is that, our missiles are always tested against targets with a radio locator beacon on them, and I don't think that's a courtesy the Russians and Chinese are going to install on their incoming warheads. There's just been so much fraud to sell these weapons systems. And the reality is they're all unreliable. The F-22 is still asphyxiating its pilots 5 years on. The F-35 is still not in operational service. It's the world's most expensive warplane. And experts are already saying this thing will not be able to stand up to the current generation of Russian-Chinese fighters because they've junked it up. It's too heavy. It's not fast enough. It's not maneuverable enough. It turns out it's not even stealthy to the new radars coming online in Russia and China. Still can't fly in the rain, can't fly near thunder showers or the electronics quit working. I mean, it's an absolute costly boondoggle. It's the perfect weapon system for a world at peace and a lousy one for a nation about to actually embark on a major war.
One thing I get confused, people always say, oh, look at the budget we have for our military, but the budget don't have nothing because people get paid so much money to develop stuff over here. Russia, isn't all the scientists, they don't get paid, right? From what I read, like this.
No, they get paid.
Oh, in Russia, I thought the ones who work on rocket research, they don't get paid for their.
Sure, they do. Russia isn't a hardcore communist nation any longer. They have government control over the central bank to manage the public currency as a public utility, but people working in Russia, they get paid for their work, and obviously you want to incentivize those who are producing the things that you need. If they're doing good work on rocket research, you're going to reward them somehow. Okay? I think you're watching too many American TV shows about life in Russia. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Dustin. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, this stink face with Russia is starting to crumble on the U.S. The European Union is basically saying that as far as they are concerned, sanctions against Russia are not on the agenda. They don't want to go along with any more of this because they recognize sanctions against Russia are going to hurt the European economy far more than it will hurt Russia. So they're backing off this whole sanctions thing. Meanwhile, the major international oil companies like Exxon and British Petroleum are openly defying Obama and extending their current ongoing partnership with Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. Now, obviously, Exxon and BP inside the United States of America can be subject to a great deal of harassment and mischief, but Exxon and BP are in other countries, such as Britain, and they're basically saying, no, we're not going to do the sanctions thing. It's going to hurt our business. We need to go on doing business with Russia because Russia has what we need and the United States does not. This comes hard on the heels of the revelation that for all the toxic side effects of fracking, they're not actually able to get the oil and gas out they were expecting. In fact, out in California, they revised downward the expected return from fracking by 96%. So Obama can't keep his promise to Europe to cover the oil and gas shortfalls that are going to happen with the conflict with Russia. Now, over in Egypt, they're having their elections, and they've now been extended into a third day because for the 2 days the polls were open, hardly anybody showed up. And now, in addition to extending the election period for another day, the Egyptian government is now ordering the Egyptian people to go to the polls and vote, with one of the commentators in the Egyptian media saying anybody who fails to vote is going to be shot. Now, the Egyptian people did vote for Morsi, overcoming very obvious election fraud to try and keep him out and put a new Mubarak light in power. And Morsi stood up to the United States, stood up to Israel, so the U.S. staged another regime change coup d'etat to get Morsi out, and now wants the people of Egypt to legitimize that crime with a new election for an already pre-selected candidate. But the people of Egypt do not see anyone they want to vote for, and they stayed home. But if there's just a low voter turnout, then the U.S. propaganda that the Egyptian elections have legitimized and validated the new ruler doesn't work. And that's why they're now out there saying vote or else. And by the way, any country where voting is mandatory, that is a guaranteed dictatorship. Okay, we've got a caller on the line, Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you were just talking about, Obama's promise to make up these shortfalls. And, of course, as you pointed out, the how in California they've downgraded their numbers of what they expect to get. I remember in the 70s, I'm sure you remember the gas shortage in the 70s where they were rationing gasoline for cars.
Driving up the prices.
Yeah, dramatically. Do you think there's a possibility, and I'm not saying that this is what they might try to do, but just to throw this out, do you think it's possible that in order for Obama to be able to keep that promise, they may try some kind of like natural gas rationing here in the United States?
Oh yeah, they're going to have to.
In order for him to be able to have the gas.
They're going to have to ration all petroleum products in order for Obama to cover any shortfalls resulting in Europe from this attempt to just get the new Cold War going against Russia. But they don't have the resources. I think the reason the Minerals Management Service allowed the Deepwater Horizon to be drilling this incredibly deep, high-pressure reserve of oil recklessly, without even maintaining their blowout preventer, without having an acoustic blowout preventer, was Obama wanted to bring those resources online as quickly as possible to wave at the rest of the world and say, we got plenty of oil and gas for you. And, of course, that turned into an absolute disaster.
Yeah, so you think it is possible. And, well, here's my problem. See, I live in a 24-foot gooseneck camper, and, well, guess what my stove runs on? Propane.
Yeah. Okay.
So, folks, any of you out there, and like my mom, she lives in a mobile home, a beautiful three-bedroom mobile home, and her cooking, her stove, her heat, her water heater, everything is all propane, natural gas. So anybody out there with who relies on natural gas or propane like I do, probably might not be a bad idea to start stocking up, you think?
Yeah, I think it'd be a really good idea because if June 3rd comes and goes and the junta in Kiev has not paid that debt, and they've already stated they're not going to pay it, they're demanding that Russia just keep on sending them free gas. It's a completely unreasonable point of view, but it's designed to basically provoke a confrontation. But if those gas valves get shut, we know that Ukraine is going to dip into the natural gas flowing to Europe to take out what they need. That's going to create a shortfall in Europe. And the only way that Obama can at least begin to try and cover that shortfall, they'll be rationing here in the United States of America.
Well, it's a good thing I've got, one tank for me. I use 20-pound tanks in my camper. and it holds 2 tanks. 1 tank will last me 2.5 months, which means with 2 tanks, I got 5 to 6 months. So I guess I got maybe about 2 years' worth of propane on stock. So I'm doing good, I think.
Well, I think that's a very, very good thing. We're going to let you go here, Art, and switch over to Blaine in Canada. Aloha, Blaine. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I try to tell people about, Ukraine and Russia all the time. And when the vote in Crimea, one of the arguments I get from people who watch way too much TV is that it was under duress. They voted for, Russia to take over, for them to be Crimea to be a part of Russia. But everyone, that I try to talk to, they says that it was under, the barrel of a gun, and the only reason they joined Russia is because they were forced. So what would you say to that when people argue with that?
I would say prove it. And don't cite ABC, NBC, or CBS as an authoritative source, because those are the same people who told us Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And you're right. You're talking to people who are spending way too much time on TV. You're talking to people who still don't want to deal with the reality of what this government has become, and they're gratefully accepting every little piece of propaganda to allow them to go on believing that we're the good guys and they're the bad guys.
Yeah, I know that's it's a rough one. I try to tell as many people as possible, and a lot of them are open, but some of them, they just seem like they're banging their heads against the wall.
Well, probably some of them are undercover informants who've all been ordered that whenever they're in public and they see anybody talking off the official story, to immediately leap in and defend the official story. I remember many years ago when I was still living in North Hollywood, and I was going into this copying place, and I had just started my website, and I was talking politics, and this complete total stranger in a business suit immediately barged into our group and said, "Oh, no, Vince Foster committed suicide. There's absolutely no question about that." And he was so obvious about needing to get in there and shout us down that, yeah, he's some kind of undercover informant. Remember, they recruit these informants in colleges and some high schools. When they graduate, they don't stop being informants. They continue with the network. It gives them certain business advantages, and they like to pretend that they're spies and James Bond and the rest of it. And yeah, we've got more undercover informants in the U.S. per capita than East Germany ever did under the Stasi. All right, we got to take a break for some commercials here. Thank you for the call, Blaine, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over at the internetpost.net, they're reporting on how the United States is using some of the funding from the Pentagon's black budget, which is kept secret from you but is estimated to run into the trillions of dollars, to train what are being called elite anti-terror troops in 4 African nations. And these include Libya, Niger, Mauritania, and Mali. Remember, the French already invaded Mali because it's Africa's 3rd largest gold producer. They're step by step trying to conquer the resource-rich areas in Africa, to bring them under control of the U.S. financial system so that everybody has to come and borrow Federal Reserve notes from the Federal Reserve at interest before they can buy the resources they need to supply their commerce. And I think, first of all, it's very obvious that's what the United States is doing. And second of all, there's a very alarming story that the families of patients that have been hit with this Ebola epidemic, which the World Health Organization is still saying spreading across Africa. They don't want you to know about it. They actually announced they weren't going to report the numbers any longer, but they say it is still spreading. And now the families of the patients are pulling the patients out of the hospitals and taking them home. Remember how the Spanish flu spread around the globe, carried by U.S. military personnel who were infected in a U.S. military base. They called it Spanish flu to conceal where it had really come from. And the U.S. is assembling these elite special forces teams to counter Al-Qaeda. No, it's to conquer those natural resources to make sure they're sold only for the U.S. dollar. Now then, a very alarming story coming out of dailycaller.com, and I labeled this one as a Bex alert. Iran's supreme leader, jihad will continue until America is no more. Okay? And I'm going to read you a direct quote from the article. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei all but said on Sunday, and we can stop there, because that all but said tells you that everything that follows came out of the imagination of the writer. Remember when they were claiming that Ahmadinejad said he was going to wipe Israel off of the map until independent translation showed he hadn't said that at all? And you had all these videos and reports coming out of MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, which is a known Israeli propaganda front. And even the UK Guardian outed them for distorted translations of everything in the Arab media, and it was always mistranslated to make the Arabs and Muslims look bad and Israel and the United States look good. And this is more of the same. This is more of the same. And again, when was the last time Iran actually invaded another country in a war of conquest? It's been over 200 years. It's not their nature. They're just trying to ramp up the war propaganda to say, yes, you must throw your children onto those Iranian bayonets until they see the benefits of private central banking and selling their oil only for the U.S. dollar. Big, huge stink down in Australia. The former prime minister basically went public saying that absolutely it's beyond question that Israel intended to attack the USS Liberty, to sink it, and then blame Egypt for it, to trick the United States into war against Egypt on Israel's side. And we know there was, in fact, a nuclear-armed strike in the air on the way to Cairo when the crew of the USS Liberty finally replaced the radio antenna the Israelis had shot away and got a message out saying, these are Israelis attacking us. And so now Israel's out there screaming, oh, you're a bunch of anti-Semites, you're Jew haters, you want Hitler, and foaming at the mouth here. Time makes ancient truth uncouth. And that interval of time between truth and uncouth is getting shorter and shorter in the age of the internet. Vladimir Putin is out there saying Russia and China must secure gold and foreign exchange reserves. And when he's talking about foreign exchange reserves, he is not talking about the U.S. dollar. They've been dumping their treasury holdings and dollar holdings, and they're stocking up on other currencies from around the world. This is the beginning of the end of the dollar. Countries are dropping the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them. And the U.S. cannot conquer Russia and China. They can't. It's just not possible. With the poor quality and high cost of our weapons, it's a losing proposition. Meanwhile, in Europe, we're already starting to see this huge media propaganda to bash all of those Eurosceptic parties and UKIP, Nigel Farage, in the wake of the sweeping victory all across Europe that is showing that Europe, absolutely, they're tired of this European Union. They're tired of the European Central Bank. And the globalists are reeling from this hammer blow. So they're falling back on that old canard that anyone opposed to their policies, they're just being racist. They don't have a legitimate reason for rejecting the European Central Bank and our immigration policies. They're just being racist. And you just should not want to be seen with or associate with those people. Absolute joke. Report from ZeroHedge.com. The head of the Bank of England is saying bankers must reassess their sense of self. And basically this head of the Bank of England is saying that public trust has been damaged by the behavior of banks, both before and after the financial crisis. And he mentions the LIBOR interest rate rigging, and the foreign exchange markets were being rigged. And he calls it an unstable dynamic of declining trust in the financial system and growing exclusivity of capitalism threatens, which is banker speak for the jig is up, fellas. The public knows the bankers are all crooks. We had that video by Alan Greenspan when they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the creation of the Federal Reserve, where he got up there on that stage and said, look, we have created a climate of mistrust, where the public doesn't trust the banks, has no reason to trust the banks in the financial system. And we don't. They are not trustworthy. I remember an experience I went through when I was back working on the TV series Lost. And we were using one of the biggest, nicest banks in Honolulu as a location. And you walk into it in the area where the customers are kept, and it looks great. But because we were working on the show, we had to go behind from the teller's point of view. And from that side, it was all rotted wood, patchwork, duct tape. It's just being held together. It looked more like a movie set than our set. And it just sort of galvanized the idea that this image of strength and trustworthiness, it's a crafted illusion. It was quite a shock to see what all of this fine formica and everything looked like from the back side. It was just falling apart here. Bank of England governor's out there saying capitalism doomed if ethics vanished. Well, I think he's a little too late for that one. It is gone. The ethics vanished with the imposition of that private central bank loaning the public currencies a loan at interest because it is designed to impoverish the people, to enrich the bankers. It is by design a system that cares not for ordinary people or what is good for the nation as a whole. It is all about looting the public, strip mining the real wealth from the populace to put in the bankers' pockets. There's nothing ethical or moral about it. It's the new form of enslavement, rule by bankers. And it's no more legitimate a form of government than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And it survives like its predecessors only because we've all been brainwashed to believe this is the way the world is supposed to be. And it isn't. Meanwhile, over in France, police have expelled 650 migrants from Calais camps. And what they're basically talking about are people who've lost their homes. They're trying to find work. They're traveling around. They're setting up camps in tent cities. Oh, no, we don't want to look at those. We have to kick you out of here before the tourists see you. We have the same problem here in Hawaii. They just kicked all the homeless out of Waikiki. We can't let the tourists see that there's actually starvation and hardship here in this island paradise. Now, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs Service recently proclaimed the success of their tax justice network by claiming a record £24 billion in recovered dodged taxes. Turns out they just made up the number. Just made it up, either to scare taxpayers into reporting all their income or just to keep their phony baloney jobs. But it was a complete hoax. This was reported in RINF.com. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over at theinternationalman.com, they've got an article about the shocking real reason for FATCA and what comes next. And he basically goes back over the history about the two earlier failed experiments with central banking in the U.S., which is why they renamed the third bank of the United States as the Federal Reserve. And they're basically talking about this new push for international tax regulations to allow the government of one country to go after assets in another country is actually the foundation of the coming global tax system, which is going to be imposed on everybody. So you're going to have your county taxes, your state taxes, your nation's taxes, and then there'll be a global tax on top of that. Because nothing annoys a private central banker more than the thought that there's money in your pocket that they are not in control of. In fact, from the point of view of the private central bankers, it's all their money anyway, because you have to borrow it from them. It's not yours. Even the money that you are paid for your job down there at the fast food restaurants is not really yours, because somebody borrowed that from the bank to put it into circulation. Now, I just got an interesting email going on back to this story that Fox News is still obsessing about over this Marine who supposedly accidentally crossed into Mexico with 3 guns in the trunk of his car. And he was arrested. He's getting ready to go to court on that. And he's claiming he crossed into the border into Mexico accidentally. And this email included a photograph of the border crossing he had to use. There's no way it could be an accident. I mean, there's signs everywhere. You are entering Mexico. Unless he was, like, drunk or asleep at the wheel. There's no way he didn't realize he was crossing into Mexico. So there's something else going on. I don't know what it is, but they're making a big issue about it. Here's a little factoid I was unaware of. Right now in the United States of America, we all know that prisons have solitary confinement, where if you're really bad, that's where they're going to put you. Apparently, the number of prisoners held in solitary confinement in the United States of America is 80,000. Now, solitary confinement is viewed as a form of torture in many countries around the world. The United States also has the highest per capita incarceration rate of any industrialized nation. And most of those people being incarcerated are immediately turned on over to these privatized prison systems that operate prison factories, which are driving legal small businesses in the United States out of business because they can't compete. They don't have access to labor that works at below the minimum wage. Now, here's a very alarming case, and it shows where the U.S. justice system is going. This is at USA Today. There has been a lawsuit going all the way back to the Bush administration. This has been dragging through the courts for 10 years. And it basically involved the fact that some anti-Bush protesters were moved blocks away from where the president was going to be eating dinner, while the pro-Bush protesters were allowed to gather outside the windows. And the Supreme Court just ruled unanimously that the Secret Service acted appropriately when it said the anti-president protesters have to be several blocks away and the pro-president protesters can be right there where the media can see them. And Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg stated in her ruling, people are not at liberty to speak whenever, however, and wherever they please. That is from a sitting justice on the Supreme Court. People are not at liberty to speak whenever, however, and wherever they please. Ruth Bader Ginsburg has just murdered the First Amendment. And in the process, she delegitimized completely the United States Supreme Court. There are no qualifiers on that First Amendment. It says we have the right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, but how do we petition the government when we're kept blocks and blocks away? I am utterly appalled at what Ginsburg wrote in her decision. And it again raises the question if, in fact, the NSA spying on us all has found material with which they can blackmail the Supreme Court justices. Remember how Chief Justice Roberts was adamantly opposed to Obamacare, opposed, and then all of a sudden, at the last second, did a 180-degree reversal on his position and voted to legalize it under the Commerce Clause. Then he left for Malta for a week's vacation to duck the press firestorm. Is the NSA blackmailing all the justices? Because I can't imagine anybody who has spent their life in a legal system based on the Constitution of the United States of America coming out and saying that you, the American people, don't have a right to say whatever you want to say, whenever you want to say it, wherever you want to say it. And this comes hard on the heels of Senator Chuck Schumer getting up there and saying that the First Amendment needs to be revised so it only offers free speech protections to the corporate media. You bloggers, you just shut up. We're sick and tired of listening to you. That's a very, very dangerous precedent the Supreme Court has just set here. Out in California, people are being very, very concerned over the license plate scanners that are being installed all over the city to track where you are, where you're going, when you're getting there. All of it without any kind of probable cause, any kind of Fourth Amendment protection, no warrant, nothing. The government just wants to know what you're doing and when you're doing it. So get in the habit of swapping cars with your neighbor from time to time. It's like those supermarket shopping discount cards. They're real. You don't get a discount for using them. The real purpose is to link your name with the products being bought so the government knows you're not buying stuff that can be used to make something nasty. So start swapping your supermarket shopping cards with each other. Gum up the system. Make it completely unreliable. New York Police Department is getting ready to deploy drones over the streets of New York City. They are really very afraid of you, is what this tells us. They are afraid that they have lost control of the minds of America, and they don't know how to get it back. And frankly, from where I sit, the only way they even have a chance of getting it back is for Obama or the leaders of Congress to get up and say, you know, all these independent media people were right. We lied to you about the Kennedy assassination and torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin and Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. We did. The former governments lied to you about all that stuff. And we now understand that that way of doing business cannot work anymore in the modern age of the Internet. So change of policy. We're going to start telling you the truth about everything. The real reason we have to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. And we will work to regain the trust of the American people, because trust has to be earned. It can't be demanded. Our government will never do that, of course, because they don't dare tell you what the real reason for all these wars is to make the bankers happy. Because no American is going to want to risk losing their child to death and dismemberment to make the bankers a little bit richer. That's a really, really tough sell. Article over at Blacklisted News. We mentioned it before. The military black budgets are hidden from you, the American people, and may actually be larger than the officially stated defense budget, getting into the trillions of dollars of funding for all these whiz-bang gadgets. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call before the top of the hour. Steve in Kentucky, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just wanted to tell you, you spoke a minute ago about the young Marine who had supposedly inadvertently crossed the border into Mexico. Just want to let you know, Fox News is breaking this afternoon that in his initial hearing, he admitted to the judge that he had not only did it intentionally, but he'd done it several times before. So the story's changing.
Well, imagine my complete surprise. Yeah, it's falling apart. Like I said, the average lifespan of a lie can be clocked with an egg timer in this day and age of the Internet. All right, listen, Steve, thank you for that update. We're going to let you go. We have to do our top of the hour break. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And, what occurred to me during the break here, thinking about this Marine that at first was claiming he just accidentally drove into Mexico with 3 guns in his car that he didn't know were there. And I'm not even aware of what kind of guns they were, but I'm wondering if maybe this is a continuation of that whole Fast and Furious scandal, where the U.S. government, the same U.S. government that says you cannot have high-capacity magazines or semi-automatic assault rifles, was using your tax money to send this kind of weapon and even fully automatic weapons down to their pet drug cartel in Mexico to rub out all the other drug cartels in Mexico. And with the huge embarrassment over Fast and Furious, they're trying to keep it low-key, and maybe they just got a bunch of these Marines driving into Mexico, taking 2-3 guns at a time. Doesn't sound efficient, but up until now, it's under the radar. Maybe this is the modern equivalent of Eugene Hassenfuss, who, when he got caught in Nicaragua, blew the whole lid off the Iran-Contra gun and drug running scandal as well. So we need to keep an eye on that, but we'll see how obsessive Fox News is now that this guy has admitted to the judge that he did intentionally drive into Mexico with those illegal weapons. Now then, the court in Iran has issued a summons for Mark Zuckerberg or his legal representatives to answer charges of privacy breaches. And they're saying he has to be prepared to defend himself in his actions and possibly pay civil penalties over all of the privacy breaches coming out of Facebook. And we now know that Facebook has been working hand in glove with the NSA, which probably explains why when Facebook went with their initial public offering and it almost cratered, somebody somewhere started pouring all kinds of money in to keep it propped up. And it may have been your tax money that was being poured in to keep Facebook up there and running, because it's so useful to the NSA here. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Glenn Greenwald has announced ahead of time, and I don't know how wise it was to do that because he just painted a really big drone target mark on his back. But he's announced he is going to publish a list of the names of Americans the NSA has been spying on. Initial reports are it's going to be something like 2 million names of Americans that the NSA is actively spying on, not just recording your metadata and saving it for future use, but actively spying on. And we're waiting to see what that list will entail. Now, I joke about how heartbroken I'll be if I'm not on it, but the real issue for this list is it a list of known criminals and terrorists, or is it a list of ordinary American citizens whose only crime in the eyes of the government is not believing as they're told to believe? Now, Edward Snowden has gone public with another revelation about how Germany's spy agency is in bed with the U.S., and the reason Berlin is reluctant to invite him to testify about NSA spying is because Germany's using exactly the same surveillance methods on their citizens as the U.S. uses on ours. How very SS of them. How very Gestapo. How very Stasi. Now, there's an interesting article came out in governmentondrugsblogspot.com, which is posting some really, really good stuff. They're reporting on a new poll that shows 63% of Americans believe that Edward Snowden is a patriot and a hero for blowing the lid off this NSA violation of the Fourth Amendment against us all. 24% said he was a traitor for giving away the U.S. secrets to the American people. And 13% just really hadn't figured it out yet. And the numbers are quite the opposite from a Pew poll that was run a year ago that showed the majority saying, oh, yes, he's got to be tried, he's got to be brought up on charges, and so forth and so on. We ran our own poll at whatreallyhappened.com earlier today, and it came out with the question, is Edward Snowden a hero? 95% voted yes, 5% voted no. And I presume those voting no are all the hired monitors that watch my website for those double plus ungood thoughts on behalf of the governments and corporations. Apple has finally responded to the ransomware attack on their devices that we reported on yesterday. And by the way, if you have not changed the password on your Apple ID, please do so as soon as possible. Now, Apple's only response so far has been to reiterate the need to change your passwords and a declaration that the iCloud is not compromised and part of the attack. They're not saying where it's coming from. They're just, rest assured, you can go on using our iCloud because it's really secure. Of course not. The iCloud was already compromised by the NSA. All these cyber criminals have to do, they don't have to find a way to break into these systems. They just have to find the back doors the NSA put in there, and they're off and running, making money off of the rest of us stealing our credit card information. The NSA's spy program, far from making the nation more secure, has made us far more vulnerable to cybercrime. But it's worth it to keep an eye on the American people and make sure they're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts or attempting to scare them into silence. And boy, that one didn't work, did it? And by the way, little reminder, the NSA that sees all, hears all, Five Eyes, monitors everything we do, they can't find the author of this ransomware. Completely invisible, which is the point I was making with my NSA challenges, and I did reprise the current challenge, NSA Challenge 6, to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And the whole point of these challenges, and none of them have been broken to date. I'm 6-0 against the NSA. And all it proves is real criminals, real terrorists, who have the resources to do so can develop methods of encryption that the NSA cannot break. So the NSA's entire prowess at spying on you is based on you using encryption they already know the method to, or have backdoored. And if you look at my NSA Challenge 6, and I know it's a really long page now, skip on down through Challenges 5, 4, 3, 2, and read the commentary for Challenge 1. It gives you the history of encryption and how the NSA has really gotten by installing backdoors on everything. whether it was the machines from Crypto AG, the NSA Key and Microsoft, the work reduction packet in DES, Leaf in Clipper. That's how they do what they do, because you're using software of their choosing. You develop your own, they cannot read what you're doing. Now, Microsoft has issued a warning. Apparently somebody came out with a registry hack which will reactivate updates to your Windows XP machine. And Microsoft is immediately out there saying, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. It could wreck your machine. It's really bad. You should upgrade to Windows 8. And I think it's kind of a very gray area. Is there really a problem with using these updates? Or is it just another excuse to try and get people to stop using XP and buy Windows 8 at a new, huge cost with all the latest and greatest NSA spyware built in? And they're just pushing, buy the new one, buy the new one, you don't want to be on XP. How last decade can you be? Microsoft can push all they want. When this XP machine I'm using right here dies, I'm going to build a Linux box. If Microsoft wants any more cash from me, they've got to remember that old wisdom. The customer is always right. Bring back XP, improve it and support it, take out all the NSA hacks, and then you'll get more of my money. Until then, no, I'm not part of your revenue stream. All righty, we're coming up on another commercial break. When we come back, recapping on some of the latest developments in the IRS scandal, the VA scandal. There's really almost too much. We need a scorecard to keep track of all of these things. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over at the Infernal Revenue Service, Catherine Keneally, the Assistant Attorney General for the Tax Division, has announced her retirement for June 5th. And we're starting to see quite a bit of this over there at the Infernal Revenue Service. And it looks like the rats are deserting the IRS TANIC ahead of the intensification of this scandal over the IRS being used by the Obama White House to deliberately target and harass political dissidents in this country. Douglas Shulman, IRS Commissioner, he quit in 2012. Stephen Miller, acting IRS Commissioner, resigned last month. A year ago. Joseph Grant, Commissioner, IRS Tax Exempt and Government Entities, June 3rd, 2013. Lois Lerner, of course, quit in September of last year. And now Catherine Keneally. They're all getting out while the getting is good. They know they were doing something wrong. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Scott in Washington. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha?
Aloha.
Hey, Mike. How's it going?
It's going just fine. You're on the air. What's on your mind today?
All right. I just wanted to let you know something you might not be aware of. I was recently doing some online banking, and I got a notice from my bank saying that they were no longer going to be able to have Internet Explorer 8 work for the online banking.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, Internet Explorer 8 being the last one that they did for Windows XP, I think it's another push for trying to get you to buy the Windows 7, Windows 8.
No, I think they're probably more concerned with the fact that some of these browsers have vulnerabilities in them that might compromise their online banking system. And to be very honest, I'll use the online banking system to check balances and checks that have cleared. I don't set it up to be able to transfer money or funds or anything like that, because it's a wide open invitation to have somebody over at the NSA on their coffee break, cause your money to start vanishing. But I think it's probably more out of a concern of these browsers, and it isn't just the security. When CERN developed the World Wide Web, there was a standard everybody was supposed to follow, and Mozilla followed it. All of the browsers followed it. Then all of a sudden, Microsoft has said, we're going to redefine the browser interface and the standards for HTML to suit our own purposes. And that began what are called the browser wars, where there was the way everybody was doing it, and then there was the way Microsoft was doing it. And it made life incredibly complex for people who are developing websites because we had to have different blocks of code based on what browser was looking at the page instead of a single unified interface. And it has caused all kinds of chaos for web developers. And Microsoft continues to have this attitude of, we are going to tell the world how the HTML and HTML5 interfaces are going to work. And that's just the way it is because we're Microsoft and we are gods.
Yeah, that makes a little bit more sense. All right, well, that's about all I got for the moment. Respect to you and Claire, and keep up the good fight, bro.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Now, getting on to the VA scandal because it is getting worse and worse and worse. And there's a very interesting article over at shtfplan.com, which hammers home a point we were making earlier in the week. If you want to know what government-managed health care is, there's no better predictor than the VA system. Everyone's talking about Obamacare and government-managed health care and how wonderful it's going to be, and it's already an absolute meltdown, disaster, because these people in government don't actually know how to do anything other than take money from you and give it to their cronies, which is how we got the healthcare.gov website in the first place. But if you look at how this government-managed healthcare system for our veterans is operating and what it's doing, that right there is grounds to repeal Obamacare, or to find any way that you can to not be in it and not let the government tell you what medications you should have, what treatments you must have or are not allowed to have, or just be put on a list in the hope that you'll die and stop being an expense to them. And now, apparently, there's yet another facet of the scandal breaking loose in Phoenix, because apparently the Inspector General out there, using a sample of 226 veterans at the Phoenix facilities, found that veterans waited an average of 115 days before receiving their first primary care appointment, which is certainly a lot more than the 14 days officially recommended by the Veterans Affairs Department. Now, Phoenix had reported its average rate was 24 days. They were lying. Of those veterans, 85% of them waited more than 14 days on average to receive care, while Phoenix officials were claiming it was just 43%. So they're lying to basically cover their backsides. And if you look at how bad this is, now you know why Obamacare is such a danger to us all. Now then, we are seeing this constant battle going on between state governments that have decriminalized marijuana and the federal government, which is out there saying we are supreme. We don't care what laws you pass in your state. We're going to come in and tell you what to do, which, by the way, is not the way the Constitution is written. And we're seeing more and more of these federal raids on legal weed shops in the states that have decriminalized marijuana. And this is in the face of increasing evidence that marijuana actually does have medicinal benefit. Marijuana, for one thing, stimulates the growth of new brain cells, makes you smarter. And we saw that when Cheech Marin went on Jeopardy with, I think it was CNN's Anderson Cooper, and just outclassed him in terms of knowledge and awareness and memory. Now, the reason for this push to crush down marijuana has nothing to do with intoxication and everything to do with money. Because if Americans can grow something in their own backyard that helps them deal with various illnesses, the pharmaceutical corporations can't make money off of you, and the government can't tax revenue that doesn't exist. And the fact that natural cures are provably less toxic than big pharmaceuticals' patented molecules is irrelevant. Because under our current system, profits become before people, and that's true of every fascist state. That's what this is all about. They don't want you to be able to grow anything in your backyard. They're trying to shut down all this homeopathic, natural, organic, because it's a threat to the profits of the giant corporations. That's what they're trying to do. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, there is the World Health Organization is admitting that Ebola is still spreading across West Africa. This is 2 months on into the outbreak. And over in Sierra Leone, relatives are removing the Ebola patients from the clinics and taking them home. That is probably a very imprudent thing for them to be doing. So what is the United States doing? It's sending our troops into more and more African countries. I sense a major disaster on the horizon from that one here. Let's see, over at spheragesradio.se, another climate bovine excrement. Will climate change make us ill? Will higher temperatures and new rainfall patterns allow strange new diseases to move in, threatening humans and wildlife? They're ramping up the hysteria. They're trying to build a case, if you don't pay us carbon taxes now, you're all going to die a horrible death. The Earth is going into a cooling phase. It's a new Maunder minimum. And still they're pushing this global warming. And for a while they were talking about, it was climate change and climate disruption, but they couldn't link those to carbon dioxide. And the goal is a carbon tax and forcing you to buy carbon credits, which are not going to reduce the use of carbon. It's simply going to loot more money from your pocket to put in the pockets of the government. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And somebody just sent me this, and I just posted it to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. This is over at federalreserve.gov about the Fed, Section 7. And in there, this is the Federal Reserve's own website, something I was unaware of, you probably were unaware of, and you need to be. Under subsection C, Federal Reserve banks, including the capital stock and surplus therein and the income derived therefrom, shall be exempt from federal, state, and local taxation, except taxes upon real estate. Let me read that to you one more time, and it is on the front page of What Really Happened. You can go and look and go over to the Federal Reserve's website and take a peek before they Orwellize it. Federal Reserve banks, including the capital stock and surplus therein and the income derived therefrom, shall be exempt from federal, state, and local taxation, except for taxes upon real estate. Think of all the trillions of dollars the Federal Reserve has made from the American people loaning the public currency at interest, and they don't pay taxes on it. Don't take my word for it. Follow the link. Go and take a look for yourself. Boy, oh boy, is that going to be one there. Now, another story that was just sent to me, this is over at Reason.com. Apparently, those military service women, and I guess some men, who have been subject to sexual assault, if they have trouble adjusting to the fact of the assault, they can be discharged for what's called an adjustment disorder, which means they lose their VA benefits. Considering how good the VA is, maybe it's not such a bad thing. But they're just looking for excuses to kick these people off the program. So if your daughter in uniform gets raped and she's upset about it, they can kick her out of the military and end all benefit obligations. That's also now linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Alrighty, scientists disembowel latest green drivel from Obama. This is another report about the discrediting of the National Climate Assessment, which came out of the Obama White House just screaming, we're all going to die if we don't agree to immediate carbon taxation. And these scientists have looked at all the claims that were being made, and that National Climate Assessment was not written by independent scientists. It was written by lobbyists and global warming promoters. And it's just another tissue of lies. And anybody with any kind of a science background looks at that and says, absolutely, this doesn't make sense. Meanwhile, up in Winnipeg, we're at the end of May, border of June, ice on Lake Superior. And up in Winnipeg, they are still losing homes' piping systems to ice. And they're saying it's probably going to extend into June. People are still dealing with frozen pipes from the hard winter. Gosh darn that human-caused global warming. Now, here's another breaking story, and we've got this on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. By now, you've probably heard about this horrible landslide in Colorado. 3 people are still missing, presumed dead. 4-mile-long landslide. And it turns out it started at the only fracking drilling operation in the area. And we got photos and geographical coordinates and video. And we already know fracking is causing earthquakes in areas that never had them before. And there's a very real possibility that fracking triggered this landslide. And we're suffering all of this, quakes, landslides, damage to the Washington Monument, only to find out they can't actually get the oil and gas out they thought they were going to. Now, a new U.S. Geological Survey has found that Monsanto's Roundup glyphosate, which is known toxic to humans, is now found in 75% of air and rain samples taken by the U.S. Geological Survey. It is now becoming ubiquitous, and it's toxic. And I'm sure Big Pharma's already out there coming up with whole new medications they can sell you to deal with glyphosate toxicity. Meanwhile, down in Australia, there's been a very alarming court decision where a certified organic farmer had pollen from a GM field blow onto his land, which resulted in him losing his organic certification for almost 3 years. And the courts ruled that he cannot sue the GM farmer because GM is all known to be safe and it's not a problem, and the farmer didn't intend for the pollen to blow onto this other guy's field. So we're seeing even down in Australia, the court system has been co-opted by Monsanto's political pull and money. And we all know what the end result of this is going to be. The pollen from the GMO crops is going to contaminate all of the natural crops until finally there are no more natural crops and the world must go to Monsanto for seeds to grow food. Monsanto's ultimate plan with all this GMO nonsense is to monopolize food production on planet Earth, to make us dependent on almighty Monsanto if we're going to eat next year. And I would not be at all surprised to find out that the damage being caused to the bees from GMO pollen was intentional, or at least tolerated, because without honeybees, natural crops have a very difficult time pollinating and growing. And apparently there is now a lawsuit. This is being reported in Natural News. There's a lawsuit to try and get a ban on GMOs and bee-killing pesticides in the national wildlife refuges across the country. And my question is, why are the national wildlife refuges allowing the planting of GM crops and the spraying of these pesticides? Aren't they supposed to be wildlife refuges? Apparently there was this police sergeant. This was reported in Blacklisted News. Police sergeant came up with a plan to frame his ex-wife for a felony, to get rid of her, to ruin her life, and he got caught doing it. And they arrested him and they took him to court. He got a sentence of 30 days in jail. The justice system is not just. They're protecting the corporations, they're protecting the police officers, and they're absolutely not interested in taking care of you. Been another embarrassment for the TSA. This is over at 12160. Apparently a traveler with his carry-on luggage had some AK-47 clips in it. TSA missed it completely. Absolutely, completely missed it. All righty. Apparently in a CNN interview, George Soros apparently appears to take credit for funding the coup in Kiev 2 months ago. And we know there was foreign backing for this to be going along. And Soros, apparently in this interview, sort of saying, yeah, you know, aren't I cute? And that's also linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Japan's government just announced that it is reorganizing the country's top nuclear regulating body by getting rid of the one person who was on the body who's a critic of the nuclear industry. And they're replacing him with an ardent supporter of nuclear power. So this so-called regulating body has been turned into a nuclear industry lobbying group. Even Japan is saying that the radioactive water they're dumping in the Pacific Ocean really is too radioactive to be disposed of that way. They just don't have any other possible choice. More fighting over in eastern Ukraine. Apparently, the forces from Kiev, or the hired mercenaries, take your pick, shelled Slavyansk, hitting a school and a kindergarten. They're not picking military targets. They're shelling everything. And, of course, the attitude coming from Kiev is, if we killed them, they were obviously separatists. The Kiev supporters, they're still alive. Trust us on that one. Same thing that we hear following every U.S. drone strike. Of course they were terrorists. They're dead, right? You don't think we would kill innocent people. Fighting is continuing outside Donetsk International Airport. Apparently 100 of the independence fighters have been killed, not because they died in combat, but because they were wounded, loaded onto trucks to go to medical care, and the Kiev forces launched grenade attacks on these trucks that were acting as ambulances. This is total war. All of this is war crimes under international law. But Poroshenko has adopted a scorched earth policy. By golly, you will be slaves to the European Central Bank, or bad things will happen to you. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last section of our show today after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our last segment today. And I'm looking at an article over at crooksandliars.com. And apparently this has actually been posted all over the net. I'm trying to work my way up to the original source. Oh, this is from Freedom of the Press Foundation. And it's basically talking about how this so-called journalist in the New York Times making the case that it is up to the government to decide when the corporate media will publish any government documents. Now, Michael Kinsley basically wrote, and I'm going to read a direct quote, "The question is who decides what to publish. It seems clear, at least to me, that the private companies that own newspapers and their employees should not have the final say over the release of government secrets and a free pass to make them public with no legal consequences. In a democracy, that decision must ultimately be made by the government." End quote. No, democracy is not served by allowing the government to conceal its errors and mistakes and crimes from the public. The reason the Founding Fathers wrote that First Amendment in the Bill of Rights was to allow anybody to stand up and say, this government is behaving badly. And Michael Kinsley is a reminder that inside the corporate-owned media, they don't have journalists anymore. They have prostitutes and correspondents that for a fee will say what they're told to say to you, the American people. Look how hard they're trying to sell this idea that the First Amendment has limits, that it should only apply to those who are favorable to the government, and even worse, that the First Amendment protects outright lies by political candidates so that they can't be challenged on it because you're infringing his right to freedom of speech. If the Founding Fathers were alive today, they'd all be having heart attacks over what this government has become. And in fact, this government has become exactly what Thomas Jefferson warned it would. Thomas Jefferson himself said this daring experiment that he had created was only going to last 100 years, and it would need to be torn down again in a violent revolution to clear away the inevitable corruption and oligarchy to make way for something better. And this Michael Kinsley is out there basically trying to say that the government has a right to impose prior restraint on the publication of anything declared to be a secret by the government. And we've seen so many of these exposed secrets revealing a government that has gone off the constitutional reservation. They're trying to sell the American people that you should only have the information the government wants you to have. Remember, we were talking about these memos that were released from the Clinton Presidential Library that all the way back in the 1990s. They were already in a panic that the American people had access to information about what the government was doing that was not being filtered by the owned and controlled corporate media or coming directly from the White House press spokeslug. And now they're trying to find some way to bring it back under control, and it's not going to work. Because everything that they do now, whether it's Chuck Schumer saying the First Amendment should only apply to corporate media, or Michael Kinsley saying it's up to the government to decide what gets published, only makes it obvious what the government is trying to do. Years ago, we came up with this little motto. We sell it on one of the coffee mugs over at our online store. The fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And that is exactly what is going on right now. This government is acting like the dictatorship it's always been. We didn't see it. We were too naive. We were too gullible. We were too surrounded by this matrix of illusion crafted by government propaganda and corporate media. We couldn't see what was really going on. Now we can. And it's like little kids when they find out that the large gentleman at the North Pole in the red clothes with the reindeer and the sleigh isn't real. There's no way to go back to believing in the reality of Santa Claus. And there's no way for the American people to go back into believing that the U.S. government is good and constitutional and just and ethical and fair and legal. There is no going back. The U.S. government may justify suspending the First Amendment. Do you think that's going to make the problem go away? The independent media will simply go underground. And the U.S. government would have to wait for an entire generation to pass before we, the American people, forget all the lies and corruptions and dishonesty that's going on. They're not going to erase it. And again, there are very obvious parallels going on between the information revolution today and Gutenberg's rediscovery of movable type printing. Because when Gutenberg set up his shop and books became affordable to the middle class and literacy exploded, and all of a sudden people all over Europe had access to information that was not coming to them from the kings and the royalty, was not coming to them from the pulpit, and they began to talk among themselves and ask questions, and it struck fear and terror into the nobility and the clergy, that they weren't able to simply dictate to the masses what they're going to believe and act on. And they did some very extreme things trying to keep the situation under control. The first person to do an English translation of the Bible was burned at the stake by the church along with his Bible. And in the end, it didn't work. Those ruling entities, whether church or civil, had to evolve to adapt to the new environment of better educated, better informed people for whom lies were not going to be as effective. And those institutions that could evolve and adapt are still with us. And those institutions that could not collapsed. And the same is true today. Those institutions that are going to acknowledge and recognize that you can't lie to the people the way you used to just half a century ago. It doesn't work anymore. And they'll adjust their thinking and their methodology, and they will survive. And those institutions that can't adapt to that new reality are doomed to go extinct. And that includes the U.S. government, both because it is trapped by 200 years of accumulated lies and crimes against the American people, and because they can't suddenly be truthful and honest about what is driving this war agenda. All of these things we're seeing, whether it's Senator Schumer, Michael Kinsley, they're signs of an absolute panic from a government that way too late is realizing how they've destroyed their own credibility with the American people, and they don't know how to get it back. Trust arrives on foot but departs on horseback. You can spend 100 years building or manufacturing the trust of the people in government, and you can destroy it with a single clumsy lie, like Saddam's nuclear weapons or Assad's gas, or the unemployment rate is only 6%. And it does catch up with you, and it's catching up with the government. And they're trying to figure out some way that they can regain control of everything that you see and hear and read, to go back to being able to lie to you with impunity. Remember the old TV series, The Outer Limits, the control voice? We control all that you see and hear. It's not the control voice, that's the U.S. government. And they're in a panic. They're absolutely in a panic right now. They have lost the faith and trust of the American people. They're not going to get it back anytime soon. They're out there already busy trying to find some way to ridicule and kookify the independent media. I can't tell you how many emails I'm getting about spaceships with aliens and Bigfoot and HARP and chemtrails and all the rest of that stuff that I have to throw in the bit bucket every day. They're desperate to find some way to regain the high ground in the war for the minds of America. But the high ground in that war is right here at whatreallyhappened.com, at republicbroadcasting.org. It's right here on your laptops and tablets and cell phones through which you're accessing this information. We do have the high ground. The audience numbers prove it. The corporate media and the government have destroyed themselves, and I have no sympathy for them because they forgot what their real job was supposed to be. The government's real job is to take care of the nation for everybody. The corporate media's job is supposed to keep an eye on government wrongdoing. That's why they were given that First Amendment. And they forgot their duty to the nation and its people. And that is why I have no sympathy for them. And the sooner they collapse from their own lies, the way the Soviet Union did, the better off planet Earth will be. There's the music. Time for me to go on out and get some errands done this afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay informed. Stay skeptical. Stay angry. Share what you know with everyone you know. Get out there and shout, this has gone as far as I am willing to let it go. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.
Thank you.